All right. So, what is a blast beat? I guess we have to kind of go back and do a little bit of history, go back to the old days, the old punk days, early 80s. It's more comfortably associated with the band Napalm Death. They kind of coined the term blast beat. It was probably played a bit earlier by an old like raw punk band from Sweden called Asocial. And that just really kind of came about with this punk beat, commonly referred to as a D beat, just getting sped up and sped up and sped up. And then, like a lot of the guys in the thrash metal movement from the Bay Area, they kind of took that as well, maybe tightened it up a little bit, but kept speeding it up, speeding it up, speeding it up. So it kind of comes from two separate sources to where you end up getting a beat that kind of sounds like this. That would be what's referred to as a D beat, classic D beat, discharge. And it's really just a sped up rock beat with kind of a really sloppy kick pattern. You could tell that these guys back in the day were just pushing as hard as they can, pushing as fast as they possibly can. And it was, I had this kind of really irresponsible mush to it. How much heavy metal and rock and roll, actually, how much modern music today comes from punk rock. Looking at it from the 80s, how much rock and roll, how much blues, came from black music in the beginning of time. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just kind of like play a few different variations of this D beat, and you'll notice that it's going to slightly tighten up each time I do it. It's going to straighten out each time I do it, and eventually we will arrive at a blast beat. So again, figure A, the classic D beat. So again, that was the classic D beat. Took the hands off, so you can see the kick figure is like, it almost drives straight through. It's not, you'll hear some guys that will literally just, and if you pay close enough attention, you kind of hear triplet, triplet, triplet. So it's almost a triplet. And on top, it's just, high-speed rock drumming. Now, of course, as we get a little bit further down the line with a lot more hardcore bands, coming out of raw punk, coming out of crust punk even, you start getting into more grindcore, which you start getting more Napalm Death, you start getting more Carcass, and all these bands, and they're just really pushing this kind of beat, this D beat, they're pushing it and pushing it and pushing it to the point where it's almost falling apart. And you get something that sounds more like this. So at this point, we're looking at what would be the meat and potatoes D beat, kind of a verse almost for a lot of these bands, for a lot of Napalm Death and a lot of Discharge and a lot of Repulsion is a good one, Cryptic Slaughter, go find these albums. I'm going to have a whole list of this stuff for you guys. And you might get into a chorus section that would have more kind of like a proto-blast beat where you would almost lose the feet altogether in a lot of these things. You just kind of hear the hands take off. And this is something that I didn't quite understand when I first started listening to these bands. So you'd get this kind of example here. I'm going to go from the sped up D beat to the kind of proto-crust punk blast thing. So that's a pretty good example, in my opinion, of where the blast beat kind of came from, how it kind of comes out of punk, it kind of comes out of crust punk, just really cool old punk rock, hardcore, 82 to 85, 87 even. And that's really how you get the blast beat, the original proto-blast beat, coming out of punk rock music, coming out of hardcore punk, crust punk, raw punk. Asocial, Napalm Death, Cryptic Slaughter, Repulsion, SOD, even Sepultura. These are very important bands on how this movement started.